On Gaming the Podcast this week, we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the original Resident Evil, which was released in Japan on the 22nd of March 1996. My name is John Robertson, and I will be joined shortly by Stace Harmon to talk about how well Resident Evil has stood the test of time, and why, quite simply, it is so iconic and influential. There will be spoilers, but I think that's allowed given that you've had 25 years to uncover the truth about what really happened at the game's Spencer Mansion. Also, for your information, we have two other recent episodes that focus on Resident Evil, one that's all about the concept of safe rooms and another on the mansion location itself, so do check those out along with this episode. And as ever, make sure to follow us on Twitter. We are at Indie by Design, that is at Indie by Design on Twitter and all other social media platforms. And do also take a moment to leave us a nice review on iTunes if you like the show and you want it to reach more people. Otherwise, that's it for the preamble, so let's get started on Resident Evil.
We've both been replaying the original Resident Evil recently, the remake specifically. And something that I've been enjoying more this time around than I did previously is the puzzles. And I don't necessarily mean how incredibly devious and clever they are, but just the number of them and how intrinsic they are to the feel of the game. There's a real exploration element and tackling different puzzles at different times, and the way that it weaves in puzzles that are mandatory and that you have to do to progress with puzzles that are kind of side quests, effectively, that net you a new weapon, or perhaps they net you just a bunch of green herbs and things like that. And I think that's a thing that I perhaps overlooked or didn't remember very specifically from my original playthrough of 25 years ago, that I've been enjoying a lot more. And I would go so far to say that the puzzling is one of my favourite parts. I think it adds a lot of identity to the game that I hadn't previously given it credit for.
Yeah, I do I like the puzzles or not? I don't know. On
an individual level, they're a bit ropey, sure.
Yeah. I think for me, I wouldn't say that I like the puzzles in and of themselves, but I do think that they're a good / kind of interesting enough way to trigger you, to tempt you to, when you're moving around the mansion and you're finding new things and unlocking new things, then the puzzles in that way do a good job of making you feel rewarded for that kind of crisscrossing around the map and that sort of sense of constant exploration and that sense of experimentation. I think the puzzles do a good job of kind of framing and rewarding that. I don't know. I don't think I'd go so far as to say that they're an element that sort of in and of themselves makes the game better for me. But I do think that they do play a key role in the fabric of the game's wider existence and wider design. I do think that they serve a good purpose.
It's how much they make me think about getting from one place to another. It's how much they make me look at my inventory and think, oh, okay, what have I picked up since I was last in this area of, in the first instance, the mansion, but later other areas. And it's that momentary pause, visualize where I'm going to go, what's along the way, look at the map, remember what those individual little rooms are, particularly the ones that are still flashing. I'm sure if they're flashing, but they're red to indicate that not
solid
everything has
red.
Been done. Yeah. Solid red. They're red to indicate that not everything has been done, and they turn green when you have. And that there's a
blue,
thing.
I
there's
think
like
they turn, don't they?
They turn what?
They turn blue, don't they? Isn't it a thing in Resident Evil? We'll compromise on turquoise, but they're blue. But I think isn't there a thing in Resident Evil? I don't know, with other people that I know that play Resident Evil, they always say full blue, and they're like, yeah, we're aiming for full blue. So you never go past an area until you get full blue on the map.
Perhaps it is blue. I just see green where it doesn't exist. But anyway, yeah, there is that visual indication of, yes, you have completed this area effectively. And that is, it's incredibly gamey, is incredibly arbitrary. There's no way the characters would have any knowledge of that, of course, but as the player, it then, for the completionist in me, it does make me then seek out, well, what is it that I'm missing in this area? Is it just a hidden item, or, you know, is it something more like a hidden health item or something, or is it something more important? And that, it's that constant pausing and visualizing, and even the way that makes me move around the mansion and visit places I haven't been to for a while, to refresh as to what is it that I need here, or why haven't I been able to progress past this particular bit. And the navigating the mansion itself becomes a type of puzzle for me, because it's that thing of, if you ever get stuck, or if you ever, it's like, well, I'm not sure what it is I need to do to actually progress the story at this point, you can just go around and explore that space in the way that you would like a physical jigsaw puzzle that you might be doing. You would pick up pieces and try them in different places, and just you have all of the information and all the pieces that you need. And so it's a question of just trying that in different places. And the game just lets you, or it doesn't just let you, it encourages you and kind of makes you do that. It says, well, we're not going to have these random, you know, we're not going to have an NPC come and say, oh, it's over here, or, oh, you should use that item that you picked up half an hour ago. It makes you explore until you find the answer.
Yeah, well, I think the map going from red to blue, green, I've looked it up, and it is like blue, it's like turquoise. Okay. The map going from blue to green, like visually giving you that information, I suppose, does reveal the fact that the mansion itself is the puzzle, I suppose. Like it's the very blueprint of it turns from red to blue when you've completed and seen all of its secrets. So like the only indication that you get that you've you fully kind of understood and grasped the mansion is when all of its secrets are given to you. So that does highlight that it is primarily a source of puzzling, or a source
it's a thing to be completed, right? Like it's a thing to be
more than just like an aesthetic kind of thematic location, although it is that also. Because there are some people who think that the mansion is for a horror game not especially scary because of that puzzle aspect, because of the fact that it is primarily a piece of puzzle architecture rather than a real feeling like a real kind of space that you're in, and you know these characters that you're controlling are being threatened within this what could be a real space. You know, there is a school of thought that says that the mansion is therefore a failure as a game space because it feels too much like a game space and not enough like a real horror space. It's all about pushing puzzles on you. It's all about making you go these ridiculously convoluted routes to get places, more than it is about making you feel like you're in a horror house, a house of horrors sort of environment. And I think I can understand why they said it, because it doesn't reflect how horror would be done in movies, for example, like a sort of a mansion, unless it's like a Saw movie, which is literally the kind of like puzzles that have to be solved as well. Like mansions and stuff wouldn't really be designed in this way because it wouldn't feel very realistic, and it would take you out of the empathy that you're supposed to feel with the lead character, that they're going through this situation that could happen to you. Like in Resident Evil, it doesn't feel like it could happen to you because the mansion doesn't feel like it could exist, because the mansion feels like it's made to be a puzzle rather than a mansion. But I think I understand that, but I also don't sort of care about any of that.
Yeah, for different reasons. To perhaps you disagree with it.
Well, I think it's slightly different in a game because. Specifically this game, because the horror from Resident Evil I don't think comes from the same place as a film. Like it's not horror in the same way as a film, in which you're supposed to feel like I said, like terror for these characters and what they're going through, and put you in their shoes. Like you don't like when I'm playing Resident Evil, like I'm not like feeling like, oh, I am Jill or I am Chris. Like what the things that bring the horror in Resident Evil are the more mechanical aspects. It's the ink ribbons in the save rooms. It's the lack of ammo. It's the fact that the whole place you're in is like a maze. Those things are the things that cause the stress and the horror and the tension. It's not the fact that you're trying to put yourself in the shoes of these characters. So that idea of the house being a puzzle, feeling like a puzzle and therefore feeling like a failure of horror, it doesn't infringe on the parts of the game that are a horror game for me. So it doesn't matter.
No, and I agree. I think I probably feel differently when I'm playing it to you based on conversations we've had about horror games that we've talked about on this very podcast, and films, and the stuff that I know that you watch and are willing, or will willfully seek out and enjoy. Things like Hereditary, I'm thinking of films like that I'm like, yeah, I'm interested in hearing about them. I'm not sure how much I really need to sit down and watch the whole thing. But so my fear, but the feelings I have playing Resident Evil is this often and consistent level of discomfort, and that comes from a couple of different places, very different places, to feeling empathy for the characters. The camera angles, definitely. There are particular camera angles where, yeah, for sure, like you can hear but not see the enemy. Your character can see a zombie shuffling around the corner, and you just kind of back up perhaps into the most advantageous place for that specific camera angle that you have.
Yeah, that's another thing, is it? Because that's wildly contrived. Just like the design of the mansion is. So it's all done purposefully. Like I feel like I say this every time we mention horror games, but it's contrived to the point of those camera angles are not just designed to make it look cool and make it look scary for the character. It's just that thing about you're more scared of what you can't see than what you can see, and even if your character can see it, you can't. So that's how it's contrived, because again, and that's just more evidence that the game isn't trying to put you in the shoes of these characters. It's just trying to make you feel some vague sense of the horror that is just all encompassing in this thing. And they do that by limiting what you can see, even if your character can see it.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like the horror is being, at its most basic level, the horror is being done to me as the player rather than to my character. And so there is a bit where you walk through a door in the mansion and you're just face to face with your character, like they're just stood right there, super close up, and that feels really weird to me. Every time that happens, it feels off kilter, and there's a lot about Resident Evil that there's lots of things that just feel slightly uncomfortable. They just feel slightly off kilter. There's like discordant music. And I don't necessarily mean jump scares. They have that, there's a very, very short and quick and complete tension and release cycle in a jump scare, which it has its moment. But in Resident Evil, it's far more persistent for me. And I think another part of that is the doors. What used to be, back in the day, was for loading purposes and needn't exist anymore. It needn't have existed, I think, even when the remake was made 6 years later. But there is something about the doors, and it isn't... Initially, I thought it was like a delaying of information. It was a delaying of gratification, in a sense, that you open the door and there's this brief moment of tension where you don't know what's on the other side. But I think actually it's more of a binary thing. It's that there is no halfway. You can't just open the door and peek through it. You are either on one side of that door or you're on the other side, and that's it. You've committed to that. And so once you're through that door, you're then exposed to whatever else there might be, and you can't easily back through the door. If thanks to the controls, if you use the tank controls, in the original you had to, but in the remake you don't. But if you use the tank controls, you then have to do a 180 spin. You can't just back through that door as you might in another game and then hold your gun out. You can't shoot whilst you're walking. You have to do that whilst you're standing still. And that, again, is it's a binary thing. Either you're running or you're shooting. You don't get to do both. So that commitment to one or the other is another thing that adds to that tension for me. And I think part of that is just because, as you probably know by now, I'm not awesome at running and gunning at things. I'm not one that I'm not kind of a reflex twitch player. So
not good at using two analog sticks at the same time.
My camera goes wild. Yeah, that's nuts. So I like to back up to a certain place, plant my feet, but then it's like, now the camera angles change. So there's a lot of stuff that just is constantly making me feel a little bit not uncomfortable, but just not comfortable, just not in control, not empowered, I suppose. And so, yeah, the exploration of the mansion and the puzzle side of it, I suppose, is the time when I feel more empowered. I'm kind of imposing myself on that more and thinking more about it. And that might be from the safety of a safe room and how am I going to get to there and what do I need to do when I get there.
Yeah, well, the game, like on the thinking side or on the forcing decision side, like it forces you to think both fast and slow, which is, like anyone familiar with like psychology and etc. will be very familiar with the idea of thinking fast and slow. Like, so it forces you to think slow in an overall sense of, what resources do you have? What route do you take through the mansion? How are you going to pick what items you take out of the chest? And when do I decide to save and whatever? And it's all that wider risk, wider questions of risk and reward, and wider questions of just how much danger are you prepared to open yourself up to, whether that's at the risk of death, the risk of losing health, or just simply because you want to save time or whatever. Like, how much risk and reward are you prepared to place on how you decide to play? But it's also got the fast, it's got the immediate, it's got the reactionary fight or flight sense of thinking as well. Not quite on a subconscious level. It's not to that degree. You still have a split second to think about what you're going to do. But do you, when you go through a door and you can't see the enemy, or even if you can see them, what are you going to do? Are you just going to run back, turn around and leave, flight away, or are you going to stand there and fight? And try to use your ammo.
At the same time trying to work out if there's other things that you can't see, like that, because that's another. It's like, the decision-making process is what is immediately in front of me, but what also might be coming up behind me that I can't see because I can't change the camera.
Well, I think actually the sound design is pretty good at that.
It is, it's very good, yeah.
But or are you going to fight and attack these guys? And you're not playing as Master Chief or Marcus Phoenix or even Nathan Drake or whatever. Like, all of those characters can take an absolute pummeling before they even begin to show any signs of damage. Like, here, you're going to show damage, especially if you're playing. Yeah, especially if you're playing as Jill. Like, you're going to show damage pretty much immediately upon that first successful attack against you. And it's also when you shoot as well, it doesn't really give you a breather. Like, because you can only shoot while standing still, and bullets just seem to go through a lot of zombies. Like, you don't know exactly how many bullets it takes to kill each individual zombie. I don't think they all take the same amount of damage. I think it's randomized in some way for each one. So you don't know what's going to happen to you if you stand there firing. With every shot you take, that zombie gets closer. So it's not that shooting your gun actually mitigates the risk. With every shot you take, the risk increases upon that next shot. Whereas in a lot of games, when you shoot, so even a lot of horror games, when you shoot someone, the enemies will be like knocked. They'll be like staggered for a second. And that gives you time to think about what to do, or just to reload or whatever. But in this, you don't get that. So it is really good at making those fast decisions, like the core mechanics of the standing still, the reloading, the not knowing how many bullets it's going to take to kill a zombie. That makes the fast thoughts really exciting and really tense and meaningful and memorable. But then the slower thoughts as well, of like, how do you use your resources? How do you work through the puzzles? In what order? In, how do you explore the mansion? In what order? All of that stuff. That's really rewarding as well, because again, there's multiple mechanics that feed into both the fast and the slow thoughts. So yeah, both on an overall kind of planning level, it feels rewarding, but then on a moment-to-moment gameplay level, it feels rewarding as well, because you're layering up, or the game is layering upon you, all of these different things that impact your final decision making. And there is multiple times there's been like a point of no return for me where I start shooting, particularly with the handgun. That's the key. I think that's the key weapon in feeding into that design, because it's the least powerful apart from the knife, but it's also the one that you get the least feedback. The shotgun delivers pretty hefty punch, and that will stagger them at least, if not completely down them. But the handgun, you keep firing, and there is a moment in every standoff where you have to decide, am I going to keep shooting at this thing? Am I going to try and kill it? And how much closer can I let it get before, surely, this next shot has got to take it down, surely. And there's no like
I guess there must be some pattern to it, but there's no like, I know that if I just shoot this twice and then let it get a bit closer and shoot it one more time, it's going to go down. That doesn't,
and
it doesn't have that predictability.
And even after you've taken it down, even once it goes to the floor, it's still not always 100% obvious that it's dead. And then you still need to burn it to make sure it doesn't come back later.
Yeah.
And like, do you have the fuel on you? Do you have the lighter on you?
It becomes a strategic decision. Yeah, the burning, the remake stuff of the having to have kerosene, and another thing that particularly for Chris with 6 slots in his inventory, that becomes another real decision to be made rather than just a bottomless. You have a bottomless inventory in the item boxes, of course, but yeah, what you can take with you is very limited. And those item boxes are the thing, for me, they are the thing that so often stop the crisscrossing of the mansion that we've talked about. They stop that crisscrossing devolving into backtracking, because if you know that you've got an item box on one side of the mansion and on the other, then you know that you can go somewhere and assess at any given time, are you closer to item box B than you are to A, and you don't have to go all the way back to that one. And I think if you had to do that, if there was only one central item box, say, it would be much more backtracking, because you would get to a point, realise you don't have what you need, and you would have to go back rather than being able to go forward on to the next one. And it can still happen in certain areas where you get to a point and you need the crank and you have to go back to a particular item box, for example. But it's generally you have the choice of whether to go back or forward, because they're spread about, and through the magic of games, you can access your inventory through any one of those. And that's a completely unrealistic but perfectly reasonable design decision in terms of your play experience that enhances the game rather than like detracts from it.
Yeah, because I think, like I said before, like the realism of the game isn't about making you feel like you're this person really in this place and everything in the world happening to them is as would be in real life. Like that's just not what the game is. The realism of the horror comes from, well, again, the gamey elements. And I think, like, yes, they could have made it so that the items are specific to each box, and you have to carry items between boxes. For example, like when you go down to the lab, it's like, okay, now I gotta go backwards and forwards on like haulage missions to like get all of my gear into the right storage box because I'm going to be here for a while. They could have done that, but
that's the Resident Evil Death Stranding crossover that we're all crying out for.
But it removes to do that would make it more realistic. But again, the game's not going for realism, and that would just make the return journeys that you already have to do, that would genuinely put them into backtracking territory, like literally just simply going here and going back here for the sake of it, just to expand the time spent playing the game. Whereas actually, does that element of realism add anything to the realism of horror that they're trying to deliver you through the mechanics? Like, no, it doesn't. All it does is just makes it boring. Like you're not doing anything that actually progresses the game at that point. All you're doing is
stockpiling for what's to come.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point, and I think that's where the game is so iconic as a survival horror experience, in that it chose the right elements to make realistic, and it chose the right ones to make unrealistic, and the ones that it makes unrealistic do not undermine the sense of horror delivered by the game mechanics. So the inventory system's unrealistic, the mansion layout is unrealistic, like all these things, but they're unrealistic in that they in the strictest sense of the word, in the word, in that they don't match reality. But they do match the reality of the game. They do match the reality of what the game is trying to do. And for something to feel realistic overall, it doesn't need to be representative of our reality. It just needs to make sense within the world of the game. It has
to be internally consistent, right? Like it just needs to have that verisimilitude. That word I can't even say. Verisimilitude.
Yeah. So, well, it's kind of. So yeah, I think that's the key thing, because a lot of conversation around like any games really, but horror certainly, It's about, it's so realistic, like therefore it's really scary. Like it's yes, I'd definitely hide in the wardrobe from this. I'd definitely hide under the bed there, or like, you have to make a difficult choice between your ammo and stuff, and that's right, like it is.
People don't want that from Resident Evil, though, right? Like I think
it's
Resident
not a
Evil
true
in the same way,
game, is it?
No, it isn't.
It's not Silent Hill or PT.
Yeah, but even that consistency, I kind of liken it to, James Bond consistency. Like, people want certain things from a franchise and they want it to go into certain directions, and Resident Evil 7, I think, did a good job in terms of going back and capturing certain elements that had been missing from its predecessors, whilst also progressing the franchise as a whole. But it still fit. And some of that was buying into that idea of, oh, yes, of course you need this particular gem or these fake eyeballs or whatever it might be to stick into this statue to open a door.
Yeah, or having a convoluted blue layout for the houses and stuff. I think maybe that's actually one of the ways that you can see how powerful, after 25 years, like the legacy of the original Resident Evil was and still is, in that for Resident Evil 7, and it seems like for 8 as well, a lot of the sort of quote unquote modernizing of the game and bringing it back to horror, that was the intention for Resident Evil 7 after 4, 5 and 6, which had been more kind of action focused. A lot of the things that they did went back to what Resident Evil 1 did, by having these locations, by having that sense of puzzles and those sort of convoluted, locked doors. Like it's in the first house in Resident Evil 7. Like, it's basically copied the Resident Evil 1 system of having keys. You got the scorpion key and a snake key and all that stuff in Resident Evil 7. That's just torn exactly from Resident Evil 1. So. Yeah,
and what do you know? After 25 years, it still works, and it works well, and it works to the point of it being part of why it's lauded. Particularly after the action-orientated direction of 5 and 6, in particular.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that it's not it is interesting, but it highlights just how much people are still calling out for that form of gameplay, which I think is which I think is a real accomplishment when you're 25 years old, and then in order to feel modern, people are going back to your design and saying, let's have some more of that.
It does, it highlights the strength of that, in particularly again around the time that it came out, where other things like Tomb Raider, the first Tomb Raider, were also coming out around that time. And Tomb Raider has not aged as well, not just in terms of that specific game, but in terms of the design of that game. There have been other games that have done that type of design better, and Tomb Raider's design is not iconic. And in the same way that a 25-year-old Resident Evil game is, and elements can be borrowed by other games, and that is referenced when that happens. Games will talk about it being a Resident Evil style, inventory Tetris or whatever it might be. Like, there's stuff in there that is recognizable as having been popularized, if not invented, by that first game.
So I don't want to get onto Tomb Raider, but I would say the Tomb Raider design is iconic. It's just been bettered by other games, and Tomb Raider has since copied from those games that it's done better. But I would still say the original Tomb Raider is iconic. I don't know if it's as iconic as Resident Evil, though. I think you can point to more specific elements in Resident Evil that have been continued and iterated upon, and both within its own franchise and in other franchises, like very specific elements that have been copied, much more specific, detailed elements, rather than trying to copy the overall kind of
blueprint
form.
Yeah. Have you? So you've been playing through all of the Resident Evil games recently?
Yeah, so I'm up to Resident
replaying
Evil 4 now.
All of them. Okay, so have you been back and played 7? Or are you doing them literally? So is there
1, 3, 7, and 3, 4 now?
Right. So is there points, because I don't remember 7? I've played I think once and a bit in VR. But are there points in that use the same tools and tricks in the first Resident Evil game, where, because the first Resident Evil game feels very much like you're allowed to explore. You're not just allowed, but that's promoted. It's mandatory for you to find your way around. You might find a map that will help, but you need to go and explore those individual doors. And that feels like you can do that in your own time, and in some cases the puzzles will crop up and you can tackle them in different orders, and for the side ones you don't have to tackle them at all if you don't want to. But then there's this slightly odd thing sitting side by side with that certain elements of it, there are time sensitive events that happen that, to me at least, on playing it through, then it's not obvious that they're time sensitive. So one of those, for example, is going to get serum for Richard, who gets bitten by a snake. Spoiler. And it's not obvious. It was not obvious to me anyway that is time sensitive. Now, logically, it is. He's been poisoned. You need to go and get this serum. But in the way that Resident Evil presents itself, and even particularly in that instance where he theoretically, in a Schrödinger style scenario, both is and isn't poisoned before you meet him. So until you find him and Rebecca, as Chris, you're not poisoned, he's not poisoned, and so he doesn't need the serum. You can't get the serum before you know he's poisoned. But once you discover that, you have to get there and back pretty sharpish, because if you don't, he dies. And it does that as well, I think, later on with Barry and the rope. You lowers you down into a pit as Jill. The rope falls down because Barry, and you can stand, and I don't think I even knew this until very recently, you can stand there at the bottom of that pit until Barry comes back with a rope and pulls you up. Or, as I think most people, certainly I did, just carry on the game. You just think, oh, that's just what happened. The rope has fallen down, not because of any sort of narrative event, but because that's saying, I can't get back up. I need to push on.
Bit of the game now.
Yeah, but actually, if you stand there for long enough, he will get a rope and he'll pull you back up. And so there's these two things that sit side by side. It feels almost like they are emergent elements, and they're not. Of course, they're very heavily scripted, but it feels emergent because the rest of the game is so static is the wrong word, but is paced in a way that you progress the pacing. Your exactly. Actions progress that.
Yeah, everything else in the game is waiting for you to act upon it so that you can move forward, which again makes it feel like very much like a game rather than a movie.
If I just stand here and do nothing, the world doesn't progress. But are there, to your memory, are there other, particularly 7, but even any of the others that do the same thing? Because
not really in 7, although you put me on the spot and I might have forgotten one, or it might have just happened and I didn't even.
Well, like the rope thing. It's like, oh, maybe, but
I don't, because
that feels iconic. Looking back at it, it feels iconic. Whereas at the time, it didn't necessarily. I'm not even sure I was aware of it at the time.
Yeah, like for a 25-year-old game, PS1 game, to be doing that, to be thinking of that is.
And not
is interesting.
I think is interesting. Like it's, that's almost a Demon's Souls level of design, where it's like there's this stuff that exists in the world that will change based on your actions, but we're not going to tell you what it is. It's for you to explore, and you can find different things out and find different endings. But that's on you. That's part of the play experience is on you to do that, or to have these kinds of conversations where you got to speak to somebody else about it.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like a lot of the elements in Resident Evil the original Resident Evil do. I think are only really, let's be honest, are only really discoverable realistically by talking to other people. Like the amount of time you'd have to spend in the game to gather and understand and see all of its secrets would be crazy, because I can't remember like what secrets or whatever or what puzzle solutions I had to rely on talking to friends about in order to solve, but I'm pretty sure I can't remember exactly, but I can be pretty sure that I didn't go through that entire game first time through and solve everything purely by myself. Like I must have been through conversation and like aha moments determined
and that thing
by...
if you just rotate that item and look on the other side of it, actually there's like, you examine it, there's something stuck on it. It's like, oh really? I didn't know that.
So there must have been a load of times where you get the answer by talking about the game with other people, which is because, let's be honest, some of the puzzle design is a bit like the dog collar thing is like a bit like what, like how are you supposed to even, like that's just trial and error.
You are, I don't know. You are given them, when you get that whistle, you get a memo with it, and the memo shows a stained glass window. That it's not super obvious. It's not like, oh, I can directly relate that to a place I've been, but it is there. Like there is a stained glass window. But I'm thinking about,
I was like 12 years old when I played this game, so I'm not going through all of it. I'm just like getting that and being like, yeah, okay, and like, yeah, okay, it might be in there. Well, I'm just trying to think of like when this game came out for me, and like even though I wasn't picking up on all of those clues, like the game doesn't become any less rewarding. In a way, maybe it became more rewarding because I was talking and finding clues through other people's experiences as well. So it has this sort of life that's greater than just you sitting there by yourself as a single player experience and like kind of either skillfully or fumbly making your way through it. It's almost like a collective effort to understand this.
And that's the Demon Souls thing. I think that's that. Like that feeds definitely into that stuff that you just couldn't. It's so obscure that you probably couldn't work it out without speaking to other people, and it becomes a bigger thing because you do. Like that sense of community around Resident Evil is real, even though it is a single player game.
Yeah, well, and I'm just trying to think of like a final thought, but I wonder if the final thought is that what we were saying about Resident Evil 7, possibly Resident Evil 8 is, what sort of greater compliment can you pay the original game than 25 years later, the series is going back to trying to be more like that game in order to be more relevant again.
Yeah. Well, along those same lines, I think a thing as a thought for what I would like the upcoming 8 to take from the original game and the very early games is that notion of allowing the fact that it's a game to be incorporated into the design and not being restrained by that, not being this thing of, oh, well, it can't be scary because it's so gamey, because it then uses those elements of it being a game to surprise you, and it's kind of gaming you at the same time. It's saying, yes, for example, yes, you can examine these items. So that's not just a vanity thing. It's not just, oh, isn't this cute that you can turn this thing around and spin it and turn it on its axis. It's like that gets fed into the idea that there's a puzzle here and there's something to be solved. So yeah, it uses the fact that it's a game not just to enhance the narrative and the structure, but also to enhance the actual gameplay experience. And that's what I'd like to see from 8. Much more of that than running around shooting stuff. Yeah, well, because that makes it a horror game rather than a horror film presenting itself as a game, which is what a lot of horror games do, really. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If Resident Evil 8 can use its mechanics in order to deliver horror in anywhere close to the same way, then that'll be an achievement for sure. Resident Evil. It might be 25 years old, but it's still got life in it yet. Come and tell us what you think of the game and how it has impacted your own history in video games. We are at Indie by Design on Twitter, and while you're there, you'll also find a link to our Discord server that we've recently set up, so do check that out as well. You can also check out the glorious video game coffee table books that we create, which focus on the art, culture, and history of the medium, and you can check those out by visiting our website, indiebydesign.net. Right now, pre-order bonuses for our next book, 20 Double Fine Years, are still open, so have a look at that if you've got any interest in Tim Schafer, in Psychonauts 1 and 2, Grim Fandango, Broken Age, Brutal Legends, Day of the Tentacle, and quite literally every other game that Double Fine has been involved in. Again, our website, indiebydesign.net. That's a wrap for this week then, and we'll see you again next time.